أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى وسلم على سيدنا محمد سيدنا وسندنا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذرياته وأهل بيته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد فصل لا إله إلا الله. So now we continue with our reading of the first module of the Matn of Ibn ʿāshir, the module on Aqidah, which I've named Remedial Kalām. And we went through first a section on the amount of mantiq or logic you have to know in order to, I guess, make sense of what's being said, what's going to be taught. And then we had a small section on moral responsibility and an exploration of what makes a person morally responsible and what their first responsibility is through that moral responsibility, which was summarized by Ibn ʿāshir: أن يعرف الله والرسل بالصفات مما نسب عليه الآيات, that to know Allah and His prophets عليهم الصلاة والسلام based on those signs, on certain attributes that are based on those signs that Allah Ta'ala set in His creation. So the idea is what? The idea is that we're not going to be able to know Allah Ta'ala empirically. You're not going to be able to see, smell, taste, touch Him, measure Him. Rather, لا تدرك الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار. The visions will not apprehend Him even though He apprehends the visions. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is the one who ليس كمثله شيء, there's no one like unto Him. And Allah Ta'ala is the one who ما قدر الله حق قدره. They weren't able to quantify Allah Ta'ala in a way that is true, or in a way that renders His right to Him. So the whole thesis of the Sanūsiyyah syllabus, which is based on the ʿāshir school, is that Allah Ta'ala must be known through these certain basic attributes that are deducible logic, based on logic. They're deducible based on reason. You can arrive at them based on reason. And so He will now mention Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, 13 attributes of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala that a person should be able to arrive at through rationality, through rational means, and that are necessary for Allah Ta'ala, that it's necessary for Allah Ta'ala to have these 13 attributes. Then He'll mention 13 attributes which are impossible for Allah Ta'ala to have, which are the opposites of the prior mentioned 13 attributes. And then later on we'll talk about the proofs. He gives proofs for why those 13 attributes are necessary and why the opposites of them are impossible, and he'll talk about what is possible for Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Not permissible in the sense, obviously Allah Ta'ala is the shari', He's the one who gives permission. So we're not talking about permissibility in a jawaz in a legal sense. Rather, we're talking about jawaz in a rational sense, that what's possible for Allah Ta'ala. So 13 things that are necessary for Allah, 13 things that are impossible for Allah, and what things are possible for Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Now, as a kind of a side note, although we shouldn't have to talk about this, but one of the slanders against the ʿāshir school by overzealous antagonists that I feel like are deluded and somehow unjustifiably and wrongfully believe that somehow or another they're defending the way of the muhaddithun, is that they say, oh, the Ash'aris only affirm 13 attributes for Allah Ta'ala, which is ridiculous. We affirm all of Allah Ta'ala's asma and sifat, all of His names and all of His attributes, even those that we don't know. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ indicates that there are names and sifat of Allah Ta'ala that no one knows but Him. And we affirm all of them. Even the ones we don't know, whatever attributes exist, we affirm them as a matter of faith and as an article of faith, as Muslims, not just as Ash'ari. I'm a Muslim. The Ash'ari school is an attempt to systematize and enumerate the beliefs of Islam. Otherwise, everybody believes in Islam. Nobody believes in Ash'arism or Maturidism or whatever other isms. We're all just Muslims. But the unique thing about these 13 is that the ʿāshir school says they set them aside from the other attributes, saying that these are attributes you should not need recourse to wahi, to revelation in order to know. You should know these attributes are necessarily attributes of God just by pondering over the signs that Allah Ta'ala placed for the mukallaf, for the morally responsible person who has time to ponder and think about things from the creation. So we begin, go ahead and read the first 4 lines. Or the first 3 lines, I should say. Go ahead.
يجب لله الوجود والقدم كذا البقاء والغنى المطلق عم وخلقه لخلقه بلا مثال ووحدة الذات ووصف والفعال وقدرة إرادة علم حياة سمع كلام بصر ذي واجبات ويستحيل ضد هذه الصفات.
That's good, inshallah. So we'll continue with the rest of it in a minute. It says يجب لله الوجود والقدم كذا البقاء البقاء والغنى المطلق عم. Allah Ta'ala possesses by rational necessity existence. Existence is wujud. Allah Ta'ala exists. And the object of Allah Ta'ala's existence is His own dhat, Jalla wa ala, that it exists. Likewise, qidam. So I have translated qidam as primordial pre-existence, but I think that this is it's not something that a person will understand right off the top what it means. What qidam means is He has priority over everything, mutlaq type of taqaddum over all things. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created time and space, so there is no question with regards to Allah Ta'ala being older than all things. So for example, if the known universe, imagine it's 5 billion years old, or a little bit less than that, which is what I guess astronomers currently posit. It doesn't mean that Allah Ta'ala is 6 billion years old. Rather, what it means is that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala existed before time. And existed, He's the creator of time. He existed before time. That He's not part of time. Rather, He's the one who caused time to come into existence. And so the question of how old is Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is not a proper question. Why? Because imagine from the moment He created time, t equals 0, and then a minute after He created time, t equals 1, and then 10 minutes after He created time, t equals 10. To ask what was Allah Ta'ala doing a minute before creation supposes that time existed before time exists, which is not a thing. That itself is impossible, rationally impossible. So we say that time is a creation of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and all points in time and space are equal in front of Him. He is not trapped by time. Rather, Allah Ta'ala existed in a way that the questions of before and after are irrelevant with regards to Him. So Allah Ta'ala is qadim. Every effect in the universe, Allah Ta'ala precedes it. He's the cause that precedes it. Every thing that occurs in the creation, Allah Ta'ala is the thing behind it. And so that's what qidam means. So the simple way, without, if you want to kind of bypass the explanation I just gave, is that He was always there. He has an infinite existence, infinitely going into the past. However, one of the concepts I want people to think about is that an actual infinity cannot exist. And this is a philosophical concept, and it's an abstract concept, but it has no real manifestation. Within the world of causes and effects, within the material world of time and space, there's no such thing as an actual infinity. In the past, or really in the future. Well, someone will say, well, how can you say that with regards to the future, that time will happen? For example, the Jannah will always be there. But when you look into the future, you'll never be able to come to a time in which you can look into the past into an infinity. In the future, you can say, okay, time is not going to stop, it's going to keep on going. But anything you can stake in the future is finite. You just keep going, it doesn't end. and so you're not going to be able to, you may not be able to, you may be able to theoretically or in abstract sense say that everything will go on infinitely in the future, but there's no point in the future you can look to now, like now an infinity of time has passed. It will never be infinity. It will just be a number that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It will approach infinity. It's not actually infinity. Likewise, there's no infinity in the past. Likewise, there's nothing in the world that we can say, that we can point to that this thing is infinite. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, it's infinity in the past and in the future, which is another necessary corollary. It's one of the 13 attributes which we'll get to, but in some sense is secondary to the qidam, to the priority, the prior infinity. Both of them are connected to this one point, which is what? Is that time is a creation, space is a creation. He made them, he's not part of them. And this is a really important point. This is a really important point, which extricates us from some of the confusion that the Christians and Jews and other people have fallen into. Which is they always, or at some point, not always, at some point or another, many of them, if not most of them, conceive of Allah Ta'ala as somehow being part of the creation. As somehow existing within time, existing within space, having a body, getting into wrestling matches with people, coming to the earth, eating and drinking, walking around, wal-'iyadu billah, dying and being crucified and going to Jahannam and coming back after 3 days, and all of these things, these are completely rationally impossible and antithetical to our conception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And how is it possible that any of those things could happen? Unless somehow or another there's part of the universe that He didn't create. Unless somehow or another there's another God or there's another set of things, animate or inanimate, that are sustaining the universe that are other than Him. And then the question is begged, then where did those things come from? Did they just appear on their own, or what is it that's making those things? Is Allah Ta'ala in control of them, or are they in control of Allah Ta'ala? It completely causes the entire idea of Tawheed to break apart, and without Tawheed none of this stuff makes sense. And right now we're just describing the attributes, but we will discuss a little bit more in detail what the reasoning is behind all of this shortly. But qidam means what? Allah Ta'ala created time, and His existence, He pre-exists time, not because He was there 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 centuries or 5 billion years before anything else was, but because He's the one who made time exist. And there are more types of priority than just chronological priority. Allah Ta'ala created time and He caused it to exist, and that's not something that requires Him being part of time at all. Rather, He's transcendent above time and above space. كَذَا الْبَقَاءُ. So the next attribute that we say is baqa, that Allah Ta'ala will always be there. لَا يَفْنَى وَلَا يَبِيدُ وَلَا يَكُونُ إِلَّا مَا يُرِيدُ. Allah Ta'ala doesn't ever, is not extinguished, He doesn't cease to exist, and nothing exists except for what He desires. The Nas of the Tahawiyah, that Allah Ta'ala has always been there and Allah Ta'ala shall always be there. Again, not because He will live within time for an infinite amount of time, but rather because time and space are creations of His, and all of it is unfolded in front of Him equally, rather than Him experience time minute by minute, second by second like we do, or space point by point like we do. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. وَالْغِنَى الْمُطْلَقُ عَمْ. And freedom from need. Al-ghina al-mutlaq, meaning that He doesn't need anything for anything at all. He has no necessity to anything at all, which is mutlaq and am. It is something that there's no exception to this rule. It's general, and it's such a generality that it has no exception whatsoever. وَخُلْفُهُ لِخَلْقِهِ بِلَا مِثَالٍ. And His contradistinction to His creation without comparison. Meaning there is nothing that can be compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone said, well, you said that Allah Ta'ala, okay fine, none of us are existed forever, but all of us will exist forever in the future, right? But we exist within time and space. Allah Ta'ala transcends time and space. So we use the same word to describe both of them, but they're not the same thing. We say Allah Ta'ala exists and I exist. Allah Ta'ala's existence is necessary, rationally necessary. Without Allah Ta'ala's existence, nothing else can exist. Whereas your existence, my existence, is possible. So remember, we just broke everything down into three different rational judgments. Something is necessary, impossible, or possible. Your existence and my existence is possible. Allah Ta'ala's existence is rationally necessary. Nothing else could have existed without Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And that's unique. There's no mithal. There's no anything else that can be compared to Allah Ta'ala's existence. وَخُلْفُهُ لِخَلْقِهِ بِلَا مِثَال. Allah Ta'ala is completely unlike His creation, with nothing being like Him. And so linguistically, sometimes again, like in the examples that we gave right now, there are linguistically certain words that we'll use to describe Allah Ta'ala that are the same words that we use to describe the creation, but there's a qualitative difference between them. It's just that we cannot make up a completely different language for Allah Ta'ala than the language that we use to describe things. That being said, even the name Allah Ta'ala is a name that we use for Allah, not for anyone else other than Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, in order to make it very clear that He is Allah and He is different. Huwa Allahu alladhi la ilaha illahu. There's no genus that we can construct that has anything like Him in it. That Allah Ta'ala, there's no one who's an ilah with Him, and there's nobody who's like unto Him at all. وَلَيْسَ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. There's no one who's kafa' for Him, Jalla wa Ala. There's nobody in the same class as Him. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nobody who is like unto Him at all, whatsoever. وَوَحْدَةُ الذَّاتِ وَوَصْفٍ وَالْفِعَالِ. And Allah Ta'ala's His unity. Wahda is what? That Allah Ta'ala's wahdaniyah. This is a particular attribute of Allah Ta'ala, which is more than just saying that He's one. So for example, there's only one Michael Jordan. I guess there's actually other people with the name Michael Jordan, but there's only one guy who was on the Bulls and he, stuck his tongue out, and he has, and he slammed the ball like he did, and he, sold sneakers and whatever. There's nobody else. There's no other Michael Jordan like him. That's not what we're talking about. That's just a number. There's one of Him. It's conceivable that there could be two of Him. You could possibly, at one point in the future, if not already, some sort of off-books freakish CIA project or whatever, it's possible you can literally clone the guy and then teach the clone how to play basketball. And he'll have a genetically identical zaban, and he'll stick it out, and he'll, slam the ball theoretically just as well, maybe even better. And maybe he can sell sneakers as well. So Allah Ta'ala is not one merely in the sense that He is He is like the counting number one as opposed to two or three. Rather, Allah Ta'ala He has unity, complete and absolute unity in His that, in His quiddity. The word quiddity is a philosophical term. It means what? It's the answer to the question of what is this thing? Quid, right? What is this thing? So what is that? That's a human being. What is that? That's a sofa. What is that? That's a carpet. What is Allah? He's Allah. So the answer to the question of what is Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, which is the question about His that, what is the nature of His that? The answer to that question is that it's unknowable to us. To the point where the sunnah is to think deeply and to ponder over His attributes, but to not ponder over His quiddity. What is His that? Not necessarily because we're telling people, oh, shut up, it's a mystery, but because we're saying, look, laysa kamithlihi shay, there's no one like unto Him. And again, the reasons, the reasons that we believe these, 13 attributes are rationally necessary without reference to revelation. We'll get to it. It's a section we'll get to. But the point is that his that is unique. There's nothing like unto it, and it's one in the sense that it's one as a counting number. It's one as in there's nothing like it. It's unique, and it's one as in it's completely indivisible. That there's no second with Him, and that one can't get cut in half or cut into pieces. So that's another element of wahdaniyah, is that it's inseparable and it's inimitable. There's nothing that can imitate it or be like it, and it's not separable either. Like the mushrikeen from the Nasara said with regards to Allah Ta'ala, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ وَنَقْلِ كُفْرْ nabash, that to mention the kufr that other people said is not itself kufr, but even though the words are detestable, that somehow or another Allah Ta'ala is part of a trinity. He's one of three, and He has three different natures. That no, Allah Ta'ala, we believe in His wahdaniyah, that His that is just one. That's it. It's indivisible into different parts, aqanim or whatever you want to call them. And so Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, in His that, He's one. There's no second like Him, and that one cannot be separated into different parts. And Allah Ta'ala is one in His sifat. Meaning what? That His sifat also are unique. No one else possesses the sifat that He has. And they are one in the sense that they are not something separable from Him. Nor are they something that that can be like replicated. And His fi'al, His actions are one. That Allah Ta'ala is the one who is causing everything to happen in the universe. His actions are attributed to Him. They're not separable from Him, Jalla wa Ala, either. So that the wahdaniyah of Allah Ta'ala applies to His Mubarak Dhats, Jalla wa Ala, and to His Sifat, Ula, and to His Af'al, to His actions, to all three of these things. That the wahdaniyah, the oneness and uniqueness and unity of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, they apply to all of them. So I have it translated here as His contradistinction to His creation without comparison. وَخُلْفُهُ لِخَلْقِهِ بِلَا مِثَالٍ وَوَحْدَةُ الذَّاتِ وَوَصْفٍ وَالْفِعَالِ, the unity of His quiddity, attributes and causation. That there's only one cause in the universe. All things are effects of one cause. Legally speaking, we have this idea that, there are proximate causes and effective causes. Allah Ta'ala is the effective cause of all things. But within the way things are, the scheme of adat that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has made the universe, norms that He's made the universe function according to. So we can say, okay, fire burns, or snow will make something cold, or somehow or another, like food will drive away hunger, and all of these other things. These are things that have legal reality, and they're part of the way Allah Ta'ala made the universe to test those who are morally responsible, the mankind and the jinn. سُمَّ خَلَقْتُ الْإِنسَ وَالْجِنَّ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, not the jinns, the ins and jinn, that He created when the ajnas bainahum. But the point is that He created this to be a test, and so He has a certain way that He made the universe operate. But the effective cause of all effects is what? Is Allah. It's wahdaniyah in that as well. وَقُدْرَةٌ إِرَادَةٌ عِلْمٌ حَيَاةٌ, and that Allah Ta'ala likewise is His omnipotence, His will, and His knowledge and His life. That Allah Ta'ala is qadir, He's omnipotent, He has qudra, He has omnipotence. That He's able to do all things in the universe that are rationally possible. So the object of Allah Ta'ala's wujud is His own Mubarak That, as is the object of His qidam and His baqa. His khulfuhu li khalqihi bila mithal, the object of that is all created things. That He's unlike any of His created things. وَوَحْدَةُ الذَّاتِ وَوَصْفٍ وَالْفِعَالِ, the object of the wahdatu that is Himself. The object of His wasf is Himself and His attributes, and the object of His wahdatul fi'al is, again, it's Himself and all of the creation. And qudratun, His omnipotence, the object of that is all possibilities, all rational possibilities in the creation. Iradatun, irada is what? His desire, that He has desire, that He's not just like an inert substance that's doing things. Rather, He wants something, and إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ, that His affair is not except for, if He desires a thing, He says to it, be, and it is. That Allah has irada, And that's why things are the way that they are. Now imagine that a person has a coin, and we think about things in probability. If you flip it and the coin is like an ideal coin, that both sides are aerodynamically exactly the same and in other physical ways exactly the same, and the flip is completely random. Although that's, there's some discussion as to whether or not that actually exists or not, but what's the probability it'll be heads or that it'll be tails? 50-50, right? But what's the fact? The fact is that it's going to land on either heads or tails. And so you cannot have a tarjih bila murajjih. You can't have a preferred outcome without someone causing that preference, something causing that preference to happen. So with an actual quarter, you can make this argument about, well, it's weighted in one direction, it's weighted in another direction, the thumb flicked with this much force versus that much force, the temperature, pressure, all these other things, they equated into something or another, causing in this particular circumstance a particular outcome. But the idea that somehow or another the universe is this completely random set of possible outcomes, which that's the whole idea that probability statistics is based on, is that there's all these different outcomes, and that we see there sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that, and we try to estimate and we try to forecast which of those outcomes will come at what frequency or whatever. The idea that you have all of these possibilities, but there are certain possibilities that occur and certain possibilities that don't occur. I mean, to say that there's nothing choosing any of that. I think that's what we say about irada, that Allah has a desire and He makes some of those outcomes occur and some of them not occur. And so Allah Ta'ala's irada is also, again, the subject of it is all possibilities within the creation. Ilmun, that Allah Ta'ala has knowledge. Allah's knowledge is of all things, the creation, Himself and the creation. Things that exist, things that don't exist. And one of the things that's important to mention is that the ilm of Allah Ta'ala is not like the ilm of the creation. Our knowledge about things has to do with specific pieces of information and the connections between them and how those connections and relations work. In that sense, they say like the brain is a map that kind of connects experiences and connects thoughts and feelings and things like that with one another. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His ilm is one. He at one time knows everything about all things. It's not divisible. Hayat, Allah Ta'ala is alive. He lives. He's not an inert substance. And the object of His hayat is Himself Jalla wa Ala. Sam'un, kalamun, basrun, dhi wajibat. And that He hears and that He speaks and that He sees. All of these are rationally necessary. Now, Sam' and basar, to see and hear, they are mentioned in the Quran as separate. But again, seeing and hearing with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala don't mean necessarily like light waves and sound waves being processed. Rather, the muqtada of that knowledge, that they are somehow or another they're somehow or another, these sifat are emphasizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understands everything and has ilm of all things that are visual and all things that are oral, that can be heard through sound. One might ask, well, why is that different than ilm, or how is that different from ilm? And so they're similar with one another, but there is differences. It has to do with understanding something or another about the creation. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with regards to them, and it will be a little bit clearer why when we mention the proofs for all of these things. But the idea is that in some sense the muqtada, the result of Allah Ta'ala's hearing and seeing is something that's similar to the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But one of the things that I want people to realize is that all the names and all the attributes, there may be some seeming similarity between them, but they're not exactly the same. And the Shaykh al-Hadith of our madrasa, Maulana Sayyid Mahmud Mian, his father wrote, who was the Bani of the madrasa Jamia Madaniya and one of the Khulafa, Maulana Sayyid Hussain Ahmad Madani rahimahullah ta'ala, that his father, Sayyid Hamid Mian, in one of his maqalat, he mentioned that someone has this objection about the sifat, the attributes of Allah ta'ala and the names of Allah ta'ala, how they're very similar to one another, aren't they just the same thing? And so he mentioned that they're not. There may be some overlap in human language, the usage of human language with regards to talking about created things, but they're not the same. Because even when talking about created things, a watermelon is sweet and ice cream is sweet, but they're very different. If a person were to eat a large amount of watermelon every day and were to eat a large amount of ice cream every day, it will have radically different effects on the body. But both of them can be said to be sweet. So maybe in your conception and my conception, they seem kind of similar, and they're not 100%, so unlike one another that a person can say they're totally different, but they are different. And we'll leave it at that before moving on. Go ahead, read the next 1, 2, 3, 4 lines.
ويستحيل ضد هذه الصفات العدم الحدوث ذا للحادثات كذا الفناء والافتقار عده وأن يماثل ونفي الوحدة. عجز كراهة وجهل وممات والصمم وبكم عمي صمات يجوز في حقه فعل الممكنات بأسرها وتركها في العدمات.
Okay. So now he talks about those 13 counter attributes that are rationally impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَسْتَحِيلُ ضِدُّ هَذِهِ الصِّفَاتِ. It's rationally impossible for him to have the opposites of these attributes. So the first is Adam, non-existence. Al-Huduth, being bound by time and space. Adam is the opposite of existence. Huduth is the opposite of Qidam. Qidam means that his existence has priority over time and space. Huduth means that he is contained within time and space. Dhal al-Hadithat. Such a mode of being is for ephemeral existences. Things that are temporary. كذا الفناء والافتقار عده. Likewise, count as rationally impossible for him to meet annihilation in the future, or be in need. Iftiqar, faqr, having need for anyone, for anything, whether it is a great need or a small need. Allah needs nothing from anyone ever. وأن يماثل ونفي الوحدة عفوا. That likewise, that it's impossible rationally for him to resemble the creation in any way, or anything negating his unity, meaning negating his inseparability and inimitability in his that, in his essence, and in his sifat, his attributes, and in his actions. Jalla wa ala. Ajzun karahatun wa jahlun wa mamat. Impotence, which is the opposite of qudra, the opposite of omnipotence. That he should ever be ajiz, that he's unable to do something from those things that are rationally possible. Karahatun, that something should exist in the universe that he has an aversion to. That there's nothing in the universe that he's upset about or he doesn't like. Now, this is something, again, in the Dars of the Tahawiyah, for those of you who took it, you'll remember we kind of took a little bit of aside when talking about the irada of Allah Ta'ala, that someone says, well, Allah Ta'ala doesn't want people to eat pork and kill one another and worship idols, but all that's happening right now. It's happening a lot, actually. And so, how do you explain that? So we say what? That there's a difference between the tashri' and the takween of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The tashri' is what? The legislation of the sacred law. And the takween is what actually ends up happening in the universe. So Allah ta'ala legislated a sacred law, and He obliged the mukallafin those who have moral responsibility to follow that sacred law. And some of them will follow it and some of them won't follow it. He wanted some of them to follow it and he wanted some of them not to follow it. Why? Because those who followed it, he wanted them to be in paradise on the Day of Judgment and to be pleased with them. And those who don't follow it, he wanted them to go to the hellfire and to be displeased with them. And so don't confuse those two things, right? One is the one is legislation within the sacred law, and the other is just the way things are in the universe. Otherwise, Allah Ta'ala, everything that happened, al-qadr khayruhu, sharruhu, hulwuhu, murruhu, all of it min Allah. All of it is from Allah Ta'ala. The destiny that anyone will taste, whether it be good or evil, meaning whether it's sweet or whether it's bitter. Not good and evil in an absolute moral sense, but in a experiential sense. Whether you like it or you don't like it, everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is exactly as it should be. So, the fath of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam conquering Makkah Mukarramah and the glory of his Hajjatul Wada'. This is also the desire of Allah Ta'ala, and then the difficulties that the believers suffered in the battle of Uhud. This is also from Allah Ta'ala. Him being driven out of his home, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is also from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And other things that are otherwise very tragic in the history of Islam, like the assassination of Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu, or things that are still happening that are very bitter and difficult to swallow, like the killing of the innocent people of Gaza. All of these things are ultimately there from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they happen because He desired them to happen. Why did He desire them to happen? These are all different discussions, right? But the first understanding that you have to have is that everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's necessary, it's rationally necessary that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an irada, and everything that happens in the universe is based on that irada, and anything that it's impossible rationally for Him to have karaha, that He should have an aversion to anything. So therefore nothing in the universe is something that He's averse to. All of it is happening through His qudra. And then the next impossibility is jahl. Jahl is that He should have ignorance of anything, or everything or anything, which is the opposite of what? The opposite of His ilm and mamat, and that He should be dead. And death is the opposite of what? Hayat. It's impossible that he should be dead. That He's just this inert substance that has nothing going on. It just kind of brainlessly reacts to things, mindlessly reacts to things. That we say that no, we don't attribute death to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالصَّمَمٌ وَبَكَمٌ عَمْيٌ صُمَاتٌ. The inability to speak. Deafness, samam is deafness, and bakam is being mute, the inability to speak. Amyun is blindness, and sumat is silence. So we go back. I realized that I should have spent a little bit more time talking about Kalām. We said about the sama' and basar, how a person can somehow see that they're similar in some sense to the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas Kalām is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this is an attribute that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. And again, the speech of Allah ta'ala is unlike the speech of the creation. وَخُلْفُهُ لِخَلْقِهِ بِلَا مِثَالٍ. It's not like the creation, that Allah ta'ala is not like the creation. He has a speech, and His speech is unlike the creation. And so we say that the speech of Allah Ta'ala is connected with the books of revelation that were revealed to the prophets. But we say that the sounds that you make when you're reciting the Quran, or the letters that you write down when you write down the Quran, so much so to the point that even the transcript of the Quran that's in the Lawh Mahfuz, in the protected scroll in the highest of heavens, which Allah Ta'ala was from the first things that Allah Ta'ala created. All of those are created. But there's a connection between those things and between the attribute of Allah Ta'ala's speech. So just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He can manifest His rahmah, His mercy in the creation through a manifestation which is part of the creation. Just like Allah Ta'ala can manifest His vengeance and manifest His justice in the creation in ways that are part of the creation. Just like that, Allah Ta'ala manifested His Kalām in the words and the letters and the sounds that constitute the recitation of the Quran. However, whoever recites those words has a connection to the sifa of Allah Ta'ala's Kalām. Whoever writes those words and reads those words has a connection to this attribute of Allah Ta'ala, which is His Kalām, that Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala has a Kalām, and He speaks and He communicates to His creation through His Kalām, and the effect of that Kalām reaches the creation, and that's what that is. And so the mustahil, impossible, is then on the flip side, Allah Ta'ala being abkam, unable to speak to His creation, unable to communicate with His creation through this kalam, through this attribute of His speech. So يجوز في حقه فعل الممكنات بأسرها وتركها في العدمات. And as for those things that are possible for Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala, it is possible for Him to do all things that are rationally possible. He can either perform them or He can omit them to languish in non-existence. If He wants, He can leave them. He doesn't have to do any of the things that are rationally possible. And if He wants, He can do all of them. And so someone's like, well, that means that doing what's impossible is impossible for Allah. Yes. But rational possibilities are not things that have any actual existence. They're just kind of like verbal tongue twisters. Can God make a rock that's so heavy that He can't lift it? We said that there's nothing that Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala can't do from those things that are possible. So if there's a possibility of lifting the rock, then He can lift it. And if the rock is itself by definition unliftable, then asking a question about it is kind of pointless, is stupid. And again, these are things that I think are flashy and tricky for a person and throw them for a spin if they haven't studied rationality or thought about these things a whole lot. But for those who have, we say that those things that are rational impossibilities in the first place, they're not empirical impossibilities, right? Can someone bench press, 7,000 tons? This has not been seen before, so we'd say, yeah, it's impossible. But if someone found a way to do it one day, genetic modifications and steroids, genetic modifications can be natural as well. There's natural selection, artificial selection, Lord knows what. Like someone were to tell another person that there's a whale in the sea that's literally 100 feet long, and that its like ribs are like several stories. Someone's like, oh, that's impossible, that's a tall tale. Well, these things exist, right? Those are not rational impossibilities. So when someone's like, can God make a rock so heavy that He Himself can't lift it? What are people doing? They're confusing these types of empirical and observed concepts with rational concepts. If the rock is not liftable, right? Can Allah Ta'ala create a 2 which is a bigger number than a 3? Right? That's not what 2 and 3 are. You're just making a fool of yourself by abusing language, because words mean certain things and you're saying, well, can a word mean the thing that it means while meaning what it doesn't mean? This is just you making a fool out of yourself. In reality, there's no reality to those utterances. So all those things that have a reality, Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala has the ability to do them or to leave them. And those are the things that are rationally necessary for Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala, 13 sifat that are rationally necessary for Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala, 13 sifat that are rationally impossible for Allah Ta'ala, and the discussion of what is possible for Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala based on what? Observation of the signs that are out there in the heavens and in the earth, without needing recourse to revelation. That a person should come to the table when discussing deen already having these 13 different attributes in their mind. Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala give us all understanding. We'll cut this lesson off here so that it doesn't go on too long, and then we'll pick up with the next lesson when talking about the arguments, the rational arguments in favor of these different attributes. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala rasulihi sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.